All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And for my very special guest today, I have none other than Chance Dillon. Hello, Chance. How are you?
I'm good. It's so cool to hear. Wow.
It is a pleasure and an honor to be chatting with you today, my friend.
It's an honor to honestly, it's crazy that I'm talking to you. That's so cool.
Well, I mean, we're neighbors, so we should
Yeah,
chat,
we are.
right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's our running joke between us, but yeah, lots to talk about today. I'm very excited, and I do want to start off by just acknowledging this is a celebration here. We are celebrating a marvelous achievement, which is Chance's debut, Mercy: Tears of the Fallen. Now, Mercy is the name of the series, and Tears of the Fallen is the first installment in the
Yes.
series. So I always write it Mercy: Tears of the Fallen, but
Yeah.
I guess you'd call the book Tears of the Fallen, right? Is that?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I have the final edition is going to have the first volume above Mercy, so that might add some clarity. I'm hoping to the which is which.
Oh, I think it works anyway. It all sounds
Mhm.
awesome anyway, and it does say on the side "Tears of the Fallen." So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, really, just a person's debut is a special thing, right? How are you feeling? How are you feeling about this
I
book
mean,
being out in the world? How does that feel?
incredibly grateful. I think I didn't know what to expect, and along the process, you do get people who tell you things that work and don't work. Um, but once it's out there in the wild, and anybody can kind of get their hands on it, you don't know what to expect. There are people, I'm sure that there are people who have bounced off of it, but even the feedback they give in their reviews and their comments to me, it's all very like warm and kind, and they point out the things that they like, and what worked and what didn't work for them, and I didn't really know what to expect. And there's always that self doubt that, creeps in. And I think, I mean, at least I think most people experience that with anything that, you try to challenge yourself with in life. Um, but yeah, it's surreal. And I'm it's like so grateful to everybody that kind of helps along the way. And then incredibly grateful for you for picking it up and reading it. I did not know, a year ago that would be a possibility, let alone, something that actually happened. But yeah,
Yeah, well, here we are. Yeah. So
yeah,
it is surreal though. Yeah, it definitely is surreal. And you will have lots of people who love it and some who it's just not for them. And that's the nature of the beast. And but it'll be a story that'll speak to plenty of people for sure. And that is what counts. But
yeah,
so yeah, we're going to talk about the book at certain points during our discussion today. Of course, this is DDF, so I got to get to the standard question. And I think it
of
might
course.
actually be interesting and helpful to start out with my standard question for my guest because it might lead to some insights into what's going on here, I suppose. If you agree that maybe some of your important formative reads, maybe in some ways, shape or form, maybe not directly, but I always think of it as, there's this cauldron up here, this sloshy cauldron of stories that are, I mean, swirling around in this brain. And some of the stuff when I write, it comes out consciously, like I want to do a nod to Tolkien
Yes.
or whatever. And then some of it is totally unconscious, but I recognize it after the fact. I think, oh yeah, that's all I know where that was from, or somebody
Yeah.
points out like, oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, that is similar to so and so. And I did read so and so when I was young and blah blah blah. So I would love to get into our standard question. So let's just do that first. Chance, going on the theory, and it is a theory, that you are what you read. What are some of the important formative reads of your life that you feel might just have some kind of uh, importance in the formation of this story, but also in terms of who you are, and go back as far as you like to Little Chance, if you want, growing up not too far from where I am.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, probably an hour, 20 minutes away, less.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I formatively reading at a young age, I think I bounced off of it. Unfortunately. It was one of those things that felt like a chore. When I was much younger, there was some Harry Potter in there, but it's not a series that when I was younger I finished. or I still actually haven't finished, I have to admit. So that's gonna, people are gonna click off right now.
I don't think you're in too much trouble there, but
Okay.
so you never
Um,
finished reading. Did you watch the films?
yes, my sister is like an avid lover of the Harry Potter films. The movies were in cinema and story were at a younger age were definitely more formative for me. Like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars were the two big ones.
Okay.
Lord of the Rings, I said this in another conversation where I'm pretty sure my watch time of Lord of the Rings is close to about as long as I've been alive. Definitely the number one piece of media I've consumed.
Well, you could do
The
worse, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. It's like
Yeah.
some of the greatest films of all time.
Yeah.
Funny enough, the I'm gonna dive into books brief
Oh,
right
I
after
mean,
this.
films are legit too. So
Yeah.
by all means,
Um,
yeah.
the recent 2021 Dune was a big player too, and just like sort of a lot of the world building and a lot of the sort of the technology was a big influence there.
Uh-huh.
Um, Formative reads. I really started reading fiction when I was 20, I want to say 22 or 23. So about 8 years ago, 7 years
Okay.
ago.
Okay.
I before that it was like nonfiction, a lot of audiobooks, a lot of self-help, as a young man's liable to do.
Okay.
Um,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
yeah. And then
So you
I
were not
jumped
a
in.
fiction reader when you were younger, in other words.
Unfortunately, like I loved looking at book covers. I loved having them in my hands, like
Uh,
the Magic Treehouse books, the Animorphs. Like I loved looking at these covers and like getting them in. I'll open the book and I'd be like, and then I'd close it. Just like not confident in my ability to read.
uh,
Um, in school, I think in high school, I believe and this is somehow I managed to get good grades in the literature and English, but I actually only finished one book
uh,
in my entire school leading up to my 12th grade. And that was in a creative writing class where we were forced to sit down for 30 minutes in the beginning and read. And I was like, okay, well, finally, like this is nice. But essentially my teacher at the time was like, you can read whatever you want from this cart. And I picked a basketball book up. I honestly couldn't even tell you what it was.
uh,
But there were other books you read at a young age, like we read The Outsiders, Catcher in the Rye, The
uh-huh.
Great Gatsby, like those things. But I didn't. I more improvised my school reports enough, that the teacher bought it, like just enough. I'm sure they were smarter than me. They were like, all right, let's just. He gave it a shot.
Maybe
Um,
they liked you. Yeah.
yeah, that had to be it. But the political thriller series by Jack Carr, Terminalist,
Hmm.
that was in terms of like my introduction into fiction as an adult. That was the first series that I like loved reading, loved keeping up on. And there are some things that are in the first Terminalist book that kind of transferred over to some of the story in Mercy. Um,
Hmm.
I,
Interesting.
I I don't want to say what those things are,
Yeah.
but there are some things that happen early on in the Terminalist series that storied a lot of what goes on for one of my main characters. Um, and that is probably like a one for one. That's probably one of the biggest kind of influences I wear on my sleeve. But that's not something a regular, someone who just reads exclusively fantasy might pick up on.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Um,
sure. I didn't catch it at all. So
Yeah, oh yeah. I'll tell you offline what it was, just so.
okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe you should. Honestly, I love the Terminalist series, and it's such a. If you want to step into a political thriller realm, it's like a modern day, American James Bond, especially this last book, Red Sky Morning, that came out last year.
Okay.
Um, but that was my step into fiction, which sort of, I became absorbed into that realm of fiction and the possibility of fiction
Yeah.
from a reading standpoint. And then once, once I like honestly watching the Dune movie and then finding out it was a book,
Mm.
which I mean, I think I knew it was a book, but it, like finding out that it's something that I can like read and enjoy was
Hmm.
sort of like a different discovery.
Yeah.
Uh, I was like, man, what is this genre about? And then playing Dungeons and Dragons and in the military with my friends and them, introducing me to the Forgotten Realms and the the lore and the world of what is Dungeons and Dragons. Um, yeah, that sort of opened my eyes to okay, I need more of this. Like I need more fantasy literature in my life.
So you actually were introduced to D&D when you were in the military, and
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
27 years old is the first time I think I ever played a game, made a character, which funny enough is the main character in Mercy. Um,
Oh yeah,
in the
okay.
first
So
book.
your main character was your D&D character.
Yeah, and it was a terrible D&D character to play, because whenever you go with the vengeance is like all I want.
Right.
It's sort of like it kind of it might ruin. I'm very much. I did some improv classes. I love acting. I think it's the fun. It's very. I get a lot of enjoyment out of that because it's another form of storytelling. Improv is very yes and right.
Yeah.
And as that character, it was very much no, and I'm going this way,
Uh-huh.
which is just not fun when you're talking about like collaborative storytelling. It's
Can
sort
get
of
you in some trouble in a D&D campaign too.
exactly. And so like I figured that out very fast, fortunately. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, let me make some changes. Let's figure out how to get this out of here and make something else. So but yeah, and then my intro to fantasy, I had gotten a hip surgery and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have time.
Uh-huh.
Let's pick up Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And I started reading Dragonbone Chair.
Which I'm reading
Um,
right now, a reread
Oh
actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That is one that I know I need to reread. Just simply because I feel like there's so much, especially just getting into fantasy. There's so much that I missed. Even summing up the series, I was like, there are things that I'm sure were planted, seeds that were planted that I just didn't catch. So there are definitely things that I want to reread about that one. But that was like Tad Williams was my intro into what fantasy um, should be.
I think
Uh,
it's a great intro in so many ways because it's a bridge series, as many people have observed, between a more classical style and a more modern, gritty style. He has that gorgeous prose. He can conjure a landscape like anybody,
oh my
He's
gosh,
got it can wax lyrical, but at the same time, there's some pretty traumatic, terrible stuff that happens in there that is reminiscent of even something in, like, say, A Song of Ice and Fire or something, So
yeah, yeah,
no accident that George R. R. Martin was inspired, along with a lot of other writers by Tad
yes,
Williams, who doesn't really get his due, I think, in terms
no.
of
No, he doesn't. And it's funny because his character voice is something that really started to stick out to me. At the time, I don't think I had the um phrasing or the library in my head to be able to identify what that was. But there was something that an experience I had while reading, I think it was to Green Angel Tower, where I'm like, wow, I know. And I think maybe I had read The Blade itself somewhere between Dragonbone Chair and to Green Angel Tower.
uh-huh.
And once I got a grasp of what Joe Abercrombie's character voice was, I was like, man, Ted Williams really does this sort of thing well too, in his own way.
Yeah.
Um, which was I don't know. Once I picked that up, I was like, okay, like I kind of see what's going on here, and I really like this.
It's not every author who does write every character with a distinct voice. Abercrombie's Exhibit A.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, Tad Williams. I mean, if it's Benedict talking or versus,
Yes. Oh my
Simon
gosh.
or whoever, there's a he does endow his characters with distinct voices for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not every
And
writer does that. Every character talks the same way, and some are really good writers who do that, by the way.
yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. And that was probably the most formative. And then watching, I mean, Joe Abercrombie, of course. I mean, he just, if you talk about just bringing humor into a dark and gritty world, I mean,
Yeah.
and of course, character voice. He was such a big inspiration. Just like the fact that he how simple a sentence could be and how much can be said in such a simple sentence with
Sure.
subtext and context and everything that he works with. And then
Yeah,
of
his
course
ability to characterize through dialogue is just amazing.
yes, it's unbelievable. And now you're listening to the Stephen Pacey.
I am, yeah. So I read the first trilogy, the first Law trilogy,
Yeah.
twice already, but now I'm listening to the audiobook, and it's just first of all, Pacey is a very gifted narrator,
Oh
obviously,
yeah. Oh
but
yeah.
Abercrombie gives a wealth of voices for a gifted narrator to play with, right?
Yep.
So it's a good combination. It really is. Yeah.
Yep. And then I looked up. I was like, what's really going on in fantasy? Because I decided to start writing it. I had that hip surgery, had a really down moment, of just loneliness, and I had already started writing the backstory of one of my characters, and I was like, let's just see where this goes. Let's just sit in the chair and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then I found,
Hip
what is the
surgery at your young age too. Wow.
yeah, it was a torn labrum. I swear it was some activity. It wasn't just, it's from, it was like, I put a lot of weight and miles on my body, and,
Yeah.
it just kind of wore it down. Yeah. But yeah, I was looking up what is best in fantasy, and it turns out, Dr. Philip Chase, the best of fantasy. What is one of his number one series of all time? It's Malazan, the
Got
Book of
it
the Fallen.
right there.
and
Yeah.
and so I found you talking about it. Essentially, there's so many people actually on the BookTube community talking about it, because I had found, I think, Mike's book reviews talking about Tad Williams, and that's kind of what got me into picking up Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn.
Okay. Good. Good.
Yeah,
Good.
and then watching you in your non-spoiler discussions, I think with AP,
Yeah.
really started hooking me into the concept of, okay, like I think I could take on this Malazan thing. I think I could do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Good.
and
Yeah.
so
It's
I picked
amazing
it up.
because when we started, there was not much Malazan content on YouTube. This was, 4 or 5 years ago, and it just wasn't that much.
Yeah,
So it was just of the beginning of this period when it was starting to really blow up on, at least in our corner of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but there were some, but not a lot. And now there's a lot more
Oh
Malazan.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's so cool just seeing, again, like we were talking about earlier, just the different experiences people have with story. Um, and I mean, I was definitely one of the readers of Malazan that was just like, okay, buckle up and just, um, I tried my best to get rid of expectations, tried to like get rid of all the past, considerations of what a story is, and let me just try and absorb this as is. Let me see what's going on in the moment, and not try to make, which is hard for me. I love watching things and be like, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and trying to dissect story in that way.
Hmm.
This sort of made it took me away from foresight, and just had me like being in the moment with the story, and that narrative structure of just sort of being thrown into a world
Yeah.
was awe inspiring. I was like, picking up Gardens of the Moon, I was like, I've never been a part. Uh, I mean, Memory, Star, and Thorn, again, Tad Williams deserves his flowers for this. But Malazan just does it Steven Erikson does it in his own unique way that, has you watching the main players in the game from other perspectives. And he's able to paint such a beautiful picture with it. And of course, his prose is like masterful.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
only gets better. And then the end of Dead House Gates, I mean, with obviously I'm not going to talk spoilers in this series, but there was a scene that happened that was incredibly formative
Sure.
in Dead House Gates for me in terms of
I
my
know which scene you're talking
comprehension. Yeah,
about. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's my comprehension of what was going on. Just hearing the word compassion and knowing that that's a primary theme, and
Mm.
then seeing this scene happen, and then getting inside the head of these characters, these different characters in this particular scene. It was like this moment of like, I get it. I was like, I get it. This is I don't get it, but I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just sort of put things together for me. And then, of course, listening to conversations, spoiler conversations between you and AP, and I think there's some even with Johanna. Um,
Sure.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Jimmy and yeah, and
yes,
Matt.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just what an experience, and so formative in how he trusted the reader, um,
Yeah.
at a masterful level, like absolutely at a masterful level.
Yeah.
And then, we kind of are able to pick up the pieces and put them together. And that was really so formative for me. And then I'm going to I have to mention Elden Ring briefly. I know it's not a formative read,
That's
but
okay. Yeah.
the rich history and lore of that video game,
Huh.
and the narrative structure of being put into a world where you walk in and you see this vast landscape, and you're not really told kind of like where to go. You don't exactly know, the rules, but not really. And you're just this seemingly unimportant piece. And then you're all of a sudden told you're important in some way. Maybe there's other people who are also important, who may be more important than you, if we just going to find out later. And I don't know, it's just that narrative structure of being, again, tossed into a world and then being trusted to kind of navigate your way through it was just in a video game sense, especially because you're able to play it. It was just it threw me and it hooked me. And then once you discover all the little pieces that aren't given to you in the game, I mean, they are through little item descriptions. You can like pick these things up, and then it tells you this is the lore of this demigod and how his sibling ended up killing him or something, like they got into a war, whatever.
Right.
um I don't know, that I just love that concept. I love that little, and I think Steven Erickson actually did a great job. Like, there's no way that George R. R. Martin didn't read Malazan before he helped with the Elden Ring project. That's what I personally believe. There's so many kind of comparisons I think I could draw. Again, I don't want to get into spoilers of Malazan, but there are things in the what is it, the god, I'm drawing a blank here, the pantheon of gods
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
that plays so much into Elden Ring in a lot of ways. And I know that two things can happen without them being connected. Also, George R. R. Martin's an avid fantasy fan. I would be shocked if he hadn't read Malazan.
I would be surprised if he hadn't given it a shot. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Of course, it's conceivable that they're like Steven Erickson, for example, definitely knows his mythology, and he's drawing from Greek mythology, Hindu mythology, and so on for his portrayal
uh,
of the gods. And I'm sure Martin also knows his
yep,
mythology, so it's conceivable that they're simply by coincidence drawing from some of the same sources, but
yes,
I think it's more likely that probably Martin is aware of what Erickson has done. But
yeah.
I have no idea because, well, he doesn't. We don't have a blurb on Gardens of the Moon by George R. R. Martin saying fantasy as it ought to be written, or.
Yeah. Wait, is that an actual? Isn't that a blurb? That
That's everywhere.
okay? Okay, I was
Martin's
gonna say.
blurbs are famous for being very vague
Yeah,
and
yeah,
applicable to all kinds of
yeah.
theories. But I think that's a literal one. I think I got that right. Fantasy
Yeah,
as
no,
it
that
ought
is.
to be.
I think that's a literal. Yeah, that is a literal one for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't remember which series that, or maybe more than one series that that particular blurb is on.
Yeah, that's so
But
funny.
you just put there was a period there where you just have his name on something, and it's
Yeah, and
boom, okay,
it's like, yeah, everybody's got to read it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. But it's interesting because you talk about a couple of different approaches. I don't know if Tad Williams is necessarily the best example, but and it's not, I wouldn't call it tropey at all, but he clearly does engage with a lot of the traditional fantasy tropes. It's no spoiler to say you have a kind of farm boy element there,
yeah,
with Simon and all, and
yeah,
he's get kicked out into the world in a very drastic way, and has to learn to grow up really fast, and you do have that, whereas he does his own spin, of course, on any and every trope. You have actually it's a very clear analog in many ways to, I mean, you have a part of that world where Simon is from is clearly very Anglo-Saxony, the names and everything else. And you've
yeah,
got the northern people who are clearly Norse inspired. You've got the Inuit inspired region. You've got the Roman inspired region in the south, and it's just you've got the Celtic inspired region in the west. It's all very.
yeah.
You could almost lay a map of Europe over Austin Ard and see where
Yes.
all that comes from. With this religion that is very closely resembling medieval Christianity,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
at all. So it's just and then of course you've got, I think, very clear elements of the mentor figure sacrificing themselves and that kind of thing, and just
Oh yeah,
a lot of the traditional tropes that Williams does something great with. Obviously, these are tools in the hands of a master in the
yep.
case of Williams. Whereas Erickson's approach is, I'm just gonna freaking flip this trope on its head, and I'm gonna confuse you, and I'm gonna bring in other conventions from other styles of literature, and you're gonna be like, and he really, you know, doing his own thing, and a lot that's I think one of the main reasons why a lot of fantasy readers come up to Malazan and they're scratching their heads like, wait, this isn't how it's supposed to go. This is not.
Yeah,
Wait, where's my hero? What's going on here?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's confusing. Whereas somebody who's, I think, used to other kinds of literature may actually be better equipped in a way to read Malazan. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I had any any semblance of bearing other than knowing that Gardens of the Moon was originally written as a screenplay helped.
Uh-huh.
That helped me coming from mostly watching movies and cinema and structure of what a film is.
Yeah.
That helped me there. Kind of get my feet on the ground. But yeah, I imagine that there are other forms of literature wherever Stephen Erickson pulled his inspiration from, that's storied, that makes it probably easier to digest for people coming from outside of fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the guy's very well read.
Oh
So
yeah.
nonfiction and all kinds of different fiction. But I think it's interesting these days because I do feel like in general, literature and especially genre fiction is being heavily influenced by screen storytelling. Now, you mentioned video games
Yeah.
and TV series and movies that have been very influential for you. And I don't think there's a writer out there who isn't influenced to some degree by screens and
Yeah.
storytelling through screens, but some very heavily so. And so you have things like lit RPG and
Yeah.
whatnot, where there's a lot of just like leveling up that feels reminiscent to me anyway of like video games and
Yes.
like
Yes.
that. And but just Brandon Sanderson's writing in many ways is like that, and he's immensely popular.
Mm-hmm.
People just kind of in general, there's I think a lot of bleeding over from screen storytelling into people's expectations for book storytelling these days.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that? And do you think that that's what do you think of that trend, at all? Because I think it has certain influences myself. Like some of them are complaints on my part, and others are like, okay, this is the way it is. I mean, literature evolves. What
Yes.
we read today, the style of storytelling is very different from what people read 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, what have
Yeah.
you. I mean, storytelling evolves. For me, I feel like most of the evolution, most of the energy is coming from screens right now, and
Yeah.
storytelling in those realms. And
Yeah.
do you feel that it is a big factor in your own writing?
Yeah. I think there are good and bad things about it.
Mhm.
I think when it comes to, it's tough because it's so easy to like it. There are lines of dialogue inside of some movies or TV shows. It could be any genre
Yeah,
where somebody says something, and when it comes across in a movie, it comes across sort of inauthentic because the writer is putting this one sentence there to tell you this is the rule of what's happening, which is usually fine actually, and I think in books more so.
hmm
Um, but when it comes out as a line of dialogue in a film, to me, it sort of takes my suspension of disbelief is like gone. I'm like, all right, well, this seems a little. Of course, everything is supposed to be, you're laying out things for the viewer and
right, right.
or
Of
the
course,
reader.
bad dialogue is bad dialogue, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And yeah, I don't know. I'm, I don't know if you can tell. I'm not against hard magic, but I'm not particularly for it.
Right.
I like ambiguity
Yeah.
to the point where I don't want to say too much. To the point where I think laying out rules. There are rules, and then also sometimes this society makes the rules, and it's not me that made the rules. If that makes sense,
Sure.
like in that way. Yeah, I think screens. I was talking about Lord of the Rings and Dune and Star Wars and
Yeah.
Elden Ring. Like, yeah, I'm fortunate. I think I'm fortunate because these are grand. You see grand set pieces,
Yeah.
and just being able to see it and visualize it and put it, structured inside of a narrative that's written is fascinating.
hmm
Um, so I think there's a lot of good that can come from that. uh yeah, I don't know if I'm smart enough to be able to dissect the and I know like positive self-talk is important, so let me just preface all that with that. um
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, you see success with people. People find success doing many different things. Lit RPG, I haven't tried it out. I can't speak to it
I have
to any
barely read
degree.
any
Yeah.
either, so I may have a
um
misunderstanding of what even it is. But yeah.
yeah, I think nowadays there's a lot of warmth attached to structured progression.
Uh-huh.
Um,
And is that,
you
yeah,
know,
I am wondering, is that a carryover from video games where it's clearly you're leveling up, right?
yeah, it's a carryover, I think, from TTRPGs too. I think Dungeons and Dragons plays a role there for sure, but I think
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, but I think video games as well, definitely. There's some carryover there. And good or bad, who knows? I think that there's a lot of it's a story, at the end of the day. Um, and it's video games also, I think, without take the progression away, take progression systems outside of video games, and just you can be inside of a cinematic masterpiece. There's this new game, Clerics Obscure or something, Expedition 33. I haven't played it, but there are so many people talking about the story of this video game. Like
Uh-huh.
you hear about the gameplay, but like that's such a not an important part of why people love this game.
Yeah.
And I don't even think progression is mentioned. It's literally the story, the cinematography, the set pieces of these cutscenes play such a big role in what makes the game so popular.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know. I think there is carryover to literature in a lot of ways there that we can take away. And that's, I think, because my experience was so all my story experience was video games and TV and movies.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Really before I got into writing. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
which is I had a video with one of my former students he's educating me about storytelling in video games and gave a bunch of examples of really great stories in video games. So I think great storytelling can happen in any medium, actually.
yeah,
But I do think that there's an influence in general. This is a generalization from screen storytelling to book, where let's just be honest, a lot more people are watching movies and watching television and playing video games than are reading books, right?
yeah, yeah,
So a lot of the energy is coming from those realms as opposed to the book realm. And I think that books are sort of being dragged in this direction, in some directions that are similar to what TV screens and video games can do, and they
mhm,
have certain strengths for sure. Dialogue is one realm where I think actually the influence could be positive. I think and then of course the action and that kind of thing, you can try your best to duplicate that sort of thing in words, and I think that goes over
yes,
pretty well with most readers. Where I think a lot of readers, younger readers particularly, but not just for younger readers, just people who are more used to reading more modern genre fiction, more modern fantasy, there's less tolerance for description and exposition and that kind of thing. Like I feel
yeah,
that's my impression anyway.
yeah,
It's like a lot of people who are used to reading more modern fantasy will pick up Lord of the Rings and will be like, "Oh, this is so slow." This is so. And some of them even tell me the movies are slow. Like,
oh
really?
no,
Really? Those movies are
every
too slow
second
for you?
every second is accounted for in
And they're
those
not even
movies.
talking about the extended edition.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Um,
talking about the extended edition. Every
yeah,
second
which
is accounted for.
it's for me, it's a sacrilege if you're not watching the extended
Oh
edition
yeah,
these
no,
days, right? But
yeah, it's crazy that they even have the cinematic versions or the
but no,
regular
I mean, I
movies.
feel do you feel that too? Like there's just sort of a less tolerance for the slow burn, the
Yeah,
Robin Hobb, Realm of the Elderlings kind of story, which gets really deep under your skin, and you get without even realizing how attached you are to these characters until something happens and you're in tears, and you know
yeah,
what I mean? And I just feel like there's less of that and more
100%.
just boom boom fast paced,
Yeah,
explosions and everything else.
yeah, I think you're right, and I think I'm I'm fortunate that Tad Williams was my intro to to
Yeah,
fantasy.
he's more of a slow burn for
Slow
sure.
burn,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think this is my just going back to process. Really quick, when I was writing, I wanted to be allergic to the lore dump. I think not
Oh,
because I don't enjoy reading it. I love reading it actually.
right.
I think it was more a practice of let's see if I can do this without it. Um,
Hmm.
and how much can I bury deep within certain lines with whatever skill level I had at the time. And let this be practice for me. That said, I have documents upon documents of of lore that I dumped onto page for my TTRPG that I ran. But I do think that you also have like this, and I don't want to sound like I'm talking down to it, but this TikTok generation of, people who are reading a book and they skip the exposition entirely and they
Ah,
just read the
or
dialogue.
I don't read prologues. I'm gonna skip the prologue. Or
That,
yeah,
yeah, that to me is like, I don't know. I feel like I don't know where that comes from. Really,
I
it
don't
doesn't make any
either.
sense to me. It's like,
Yeah,
why are you reading a book? Just, I mean, in that instance, it's, I don't know, the exposition and the subtext, all that is so important. Um,
right.
and I do love, I love my history. I love lore dumps. I love reading them. Um, yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance that we are starting to see a separation from that, and it also sucks to think that maybe I just contributed to it.
Oh, I don't
I don't
know. I
know.
mean,
I don't know.
there's a lot of lore in your writing, though. There's a lot. I mean, and I struggled with that in my first book, especially just trying to introduce readers to the world that I have. And I know that in my earlier drafts, I had way too much. I had way too much, and I wanted everybody to know the history of my whole world, and
Yeah.
because I did all this work and I wrote all these pages about the mythology, and you have to know all this. Well,
Yeah.
actually, the question is what serves the story, what serves the story. And I had to make painful, excisions out of my
Yeah.
story because I realized this is going to be boring. I love this, but this is a major interruption to the story and the reader. And I still have stuff in there. I'm sure people would say, well, that's kind of a bit of a lore dump there, isn't it? But I don't know. I'm coming from being since I was 12 years old, a huge fan of Middle Earth and
Yeah. Yeah.
where there are songs and poems and
Yes. Yeah.
explanations of what came before. And so I don't think I have anything close to that, but I also feel like, and even with Tad Williams, the first 150 pages of the Dragonbone chair is just okay. Here we are. Here's the
Yeah.
Hayholt, and get
Yep.
used to it. We're gonna be here for a while,
It's
and life is the
comfortable.
Hayholt, and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And oh, and here's some little hints about the past, and oh, look how deep it is, and
Yeah.
we don't know what the story's gonna do for those 150 pages.
Yeah. Not at all. That is so funny. Um, but there is something to, I think, I think that zeitgeist wise, yeah, I think that we're starting to step away from exposition, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
I think at least we were. I think now we're starting to see more of an appreciation for the long form content.
Okay.
And so we might be, I don't think it's ever just going to be one thing, like you were saying earlier. Like this is, what reading has become. Sure,
Right.
yes, and also I think that we're coming back to wanting that. We're coming back to needing
Hmm.
that slow burn. The delayed gratification, it's people are aware of this term. They're aware of what that means, and we're also aware that our computer screens that we have in our pockets
Right.
provide us with a lot of instant gratification and dopamine and scrolling, doom scrolling.
Yeah. Oh, that's competition.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, but I think the acknowledgement of the detriment to mental health of those things
Yes.
is starting to kind of turn people in the direction of the longer form content.
Yeah.
Less looking at the screen, and the popularity of audiobooks also is helping, I think, getting people more into reading and absorbing stories and books.
Uh-huh.
um, and I think at some point in if somebody starts with an audiobook and then eventually is like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna actually see what it's like to read this and
Yeah.
feel and a lot of times, sometimes you do both, you read and you listen at the same time. And that itself is a great experience. If I definitely would suggest people who struggle with painting pictures in their head of what the voices sound like, and they like that
Mm.
definitely listen to Stephen Pacey and also read Joe Abercrombie's words to see how masterful
Yeah.
Joe Abercrombie is at providing Stephen Pacey with the voice, like you were saying,
Yeah.
to be able to create the way that he did, Stephen Pacey.
Yeah. Oh, I sure hope you're right. I would that would restore some of my faith in humanity
Yeah,
because
yeah,
the sad truth is we're up against a lot of factors here. You talked about the competition with screens and everything. There's just a lot of distractions, a lot of things, and a lot of them are not very fulfilling. It's like instead of eating a good meal, people are eating, like gummy bears for dinner.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but a
No,
lot
you're
of
right.
stuff is
You're
just
right.
vacuous. It's just doom scrolling and
Yeah.
and there's no sense of fulfillment when you spend your time that way. It may feel easy in the moment, but in the long run, no wonder people are depressed because they're not creating anything. They're not doing anything,
Yep.
and now we're in this horrible AI, era where,
Yeah.
to me, this is going to just compound a lot of this kind of universal depression that we've been in for the last decade or two, with all of being surrounded by technology and the
Yeah.
the immediate dopamine hits, but that
Mhm.
ultimately are just like empty. And with the AI stuff, a lot of people think they're being clever by having AI essentially do everything for them. The problem is they're not being clever, they're being really dumb
Yeah.
because, I mean, there are studies now that are out there that show very clearly that the more you use AI tools, the less you have, the less critical thinking ability you have.
Oh, wow. Makes
There,
sense.
there are studies now that,
That makes
the more
sense.
you're leaning on AI, the less you're able to think for yourself. And
Yeah.
people who write their papers using AI, or even, in my opinion, edit using AI,
Yeah. Yeah.
you are taking the best part of everything away from yourself. You are
Yeah.
throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
When you're robbing yourself of the ability to create, and
Hmm.
you're leaning on something else to do it for you, that's not good. That is, I think, really terrible for the human spirit.
Yeah.
So I really hope you're right and that people are waking up and putting their phones away and
Yeah.
being buried in a nice big fat book.
Yeah.
And there are economic things too, of course. Like, publishers don't want to publish big books, long series, because they're, economic disincentives, and
Yep.
the publishing industry is a mess right now, and
Yes.
they're struggling. So they're looking for ways to, save money, and they don't
Yep.
want to publish big, large tomes. Like, I don't know if we'll ever have another Malazan Book of the Fallen, or Wheel of Time,
Yeah.
or it's hopefully, but we have Wars of Light and Shadow,
Yep.
and it's one of the most brilliant series ever written, and you literally have to have an author, like a brilliant, gifted author like Johnny Wirtz.
Yep.
Her fans have to beg her publisher to please come on, put the audiobooks out.
Yep. Yep.
What's up with that?
Yeah. You see
Um,
Alex posting on Twitter every day
yeah,
for I don't
yeah.
know.
I,
Yeah.
I usually repost when I see
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
I'll,
yeah. Me
I'll
too. Me too.
repost it.
Yeah.
Where are the audiobooks? Why are you sitting on this?
Yeah, it's that's crazy. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
so I don't know. I would love to see more people get into the bigger, longer, more complex, series. It feels like everything in recent years has been going against it, but I hope you're right. I hope there's a tide turning, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think I this is just I'm trying to speak from my experience here. I was in the military with a bunch of great guys, critical thinkers for sure.
Mhm.
By the way, not everybody is a critical thinker in the military, but
But you're in
for
trouble if you're in the military and you can't think critically. You're in
yeah,
trouble.
oh yeah, oh yeah. But yeah, I was fortunate to be surrounded by some great guys, and they're telling me about not platoons I was in, but they're talking about because I wasn't in platoon, I was in a squadron for F-18s, but they were talking about his whole platoon. Now, this is I'm referring to Red Rising, which maybe uh, isn't what we're talking about because it is sort of like a very fast-paced boom 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 story.
Yeah.
But they're reading the whole series, like they're getting after the entire series because they love that world, they love that universe.
Hmm.
And I think we're going to start to see more of that. We're going to start to see, communities of people start to pick up these stories, and I think military, especially, yeah, like I know it's such a small subset of a population, but I think it does story kind of what people are hungry for in
Yeah.
a lot of ways, even though everybody has different shared experiences and so on and so forth. But I think community is also a big part of it. And what BookTube and you specifically,
Yeah.
Mike, John from Talking Story, Jake, like all these people are doing is, this community that's being created around books, and in this case, big fantasy books with a lot of exposition.
Right.
We're starting to see people come together and out of the woodwork, traditionally where it may be easy to not be so proud of loving and enjoying fantasy for some reason.
Hmm.
I always loved it growing up. I played World of Warcraft growing up, like fantasy in general. And yeah, there were times I got made fun of, and I was like, yeah, I don't care. Like, what the heck? Like, I like it. At the end of the day, it is what it is. I think we're starting to see people come together in on a greater scale where people can now engage. Whether they make videos or not doesn't necessarily matter, but they're engaging in the comments in a warm way.
Yeah.
um, and it's to me, I see that and I see a positive trend. I see smaller channels getting a lot of engagement, like myself included, where people come in and talk about the stories that are moving them.
Yeah.
And I have confidence and faith that those things are on the way in terms of people enjoying, going back to enjoying exposition. And I will say that screens, ironically enough, play a part in that
Yeah.
because,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
not all negative. Yeah. You can't
yeah,
just say screen's bad.
yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
For
Huh.
me, watching that first Dune movie, I didn't know what I was getting into. I watched it once, and I was like, man, there's something here. I just had that feeling of like, man, there's something I'm not getting here.
Right.
That is, there's some wonderment here that maybe if I let me watch it again. I watched it again, and I
Huh.
was like, oh, like the relationship between House Atreides and the Harkonnens, and there's some things here that go way deeper. And then you talk about spice and what that does to the culture, and coming from the outer planet, and being the savior, and then you go to Frank Herbert's commentary on not all heroes are great. And then you can talk to Christopher Rocchio, and he's like, he didn't do it well, which which, by the way, I love Christopher Rocchio. He's
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think that that transition of, because that's really sort of what got me into wanting to read more, was watching the Dune movie and being like,
Yeah.
and the first Dune movie is not a fast paced action flick by any means,
No. No.
um, and yeah, it made me want more, maybe want more of that world. I just thought I was experiencing something, and then you
Yep.
lo and behold find BookTube, and here I am.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I saw that too because I took my younger daughter to see the Dune movies, and she loved them
Yeah,
and wanted to read. No, she's always been a reader too, but she wanted to read Dune immediately after,
yeah,
so yeah, it
yeah.
works.
Just the hunger.
Yeah, for sure. You talked about the military too, and a lot of your love for reading came from your experience in the military. And this is something that I've found as well. I mean, I grew up an Army brat. I think you were in the Navy, is that right? It
I
was
was in the Navy. Yeah,
Navy? Yeah. Okay, cool. I grew up an Army brat, and but even more importantly, um, I have students who were in the military, and I have to tell you that my most disciplined, motivated, and just highest performing students are out of the military. Like they have just and a lot of them will tell me I was an idiot when I was in high school. I was a complete doofus. I had no idea what I was doing, but those years I spent in the military really taught me a lot, and it could make somebody into a disciplined reader too, just to having that experience. I don't know if that was the case for you or not, but was that a factor in you becoming a reader, do you think? And a writer?
uh,
More importantly, even a writer. Would you have had the
yeah.
discipline to be a writer without your military experience?
I think that's a great question. I've been fortunate to have been disciplined, leading, because I joined the military when I was 25. So
Hmm.
I got into it at a little bit of an
A
older
little bit later.
age.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a job that I knew was going to be challenging to get. I ended up not being able to get it. Body just didn't hold up, and I chose to go in a different direction.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think going back to critical thought, it takes a kind of person to sit in your house, and let's say the military is something that you want to do, or maybe it's been, it's been whispering in your ear here and there. You're like, oh, that sounds like, there's structure, and I crave structure, I crave discipline. But it does take a critical mind to also acknowledge our shortcomings, in
Yep.
I'll call it the real world, and be like, all right, I need these things. I need to put myself in a position to be uncomfortable, to learn these things, and then boom, now I got this new set of tools that I can utilize in the real world.
Hmm.
Um, and so it I will say the self-doubt aspect of it. Although I consider that, I consider that there was a not colossal failure. That's probably not being fair to myself, but there was a failure on my part, in not getting the job that I wanted
Uh-huh.
initially in the military. Um, but knowing that I can put work in, um, and execute and get to a point where you're putting yourself out there, and then
Sure.
what happens. That was a big part in my ability to follow through with the writing journey,
Yeah.
and all of that, and like taking it seriously, and being a pro for sure, um, and approaching it from a professional standpoint, because that's how I felt I needed to do it, because that's what I was surrounded by. I was surrounded by professionals,
Yeah.
early on in my career.
Yeah.
Uh, Before that, before the military, before trying to even go for that job that I failed at getting, and a part of it is definitely the beating myself up for not succeeding.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, you got to follow through, because if you don't follow through, you failed again, and you don't want to fail again, because you know how that feels at that level.
Right.
Um, I think before that, there were a bunch of things growing up that I like loved to do and wanted to do, and storytelling, sitting at the dinner table and laughing and making up stories, or running around outside with my cape and a stick. Those things were uh, important. But I don't think that, this is me coming around full circle here, back to
Hmm.
your original question. Yes, I think the military helped me become a part of that process, and I don't think I was able to articulate it until you asked me. So thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it definitely did help, because not in the way of like, okay, wake up at 5 a.m. Like I was waking up at 3 a.m. to work one of my three jobs when I was 17, 18, 19. Sorry, 18, 19, 20. That wasn't the issue. The issue was being able to follow through, being able to commit
Yeah.
to something, and put yourself in a position where you're making a commitment and seeing what happens. Um, in my case, I paid the man. I had to pay my dues. I had to put my time in, because of when I decided to leave the job training that I was at.
Hmm.
Um, and I had to do the thing that I swore to myself I would never do, because I was like, there's no way I'm leaving. There's no way that I'm going to stop. And then I did, and I had to, pay the man. I had to do the rest of my time in the military doing a job I didn't want to do,
Yep.
because I obligated myself to service. And when people who were there, who made a choice to be at that job, who would complain, having been a person who didn't want to be at that job, I would always call them out. Misery loves company, and that is something that is rampant, I think, in a lot of fields of work, not just the military.
Oh, sure.
um, Also, I think you get the bonding of that, and of being in not so great circumstances, being uncomfortable and coming together, acknowledging it, and then moving on.
Yeah.
um, but
Yeah.
yes, to your original question, sorry, I went on a ramble there.
Well, it's so interesting because I do think that failures define us, but to a large degree, we get to choose how they define us, right?
Yes,
And how do you respond to this failure? I'll give just to give myself, we don't,
please.
you
Yeah.
give your example, but I wanted to publish my books. I worked on them for years and years. I got an agent. I thought I was going to publish my books traditionally. That didn't happen. I didn't get the contract that I was convinced at one time I was going to get. My timing was terrible, and I was trying to publish epic fantasy at a time when publishers were like, no epic fantasy. So I had to figure out something else and it ended up self-publishing, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I
Yeah.
have not once regretted that moment where I was like, I'm going to self-publish this, I'm going to bring this out myself. There are just so many advantages to doing it this way too. It's like you get creative freedom. No editor is going to tell me, oh no, this isn't going to sell well. You need to sex this up, or you need to
Yeah.
do more of this or that, or which I don't want, or this doesn't make sense right now. I want you to change this, which would make me change a bunch of other things. I don't have to deal with that, you know.
Yeah.
I have my vision intact, and I like that. And of course, you have control over. I'm going to publish, in my case, 3 books in 1 year. You know, I had them ready. Why not? Uh,
Yeah.
so and no publisher is ever going to let me do that. So, you know, there's just so many advantages. Plus, I met a bunch of cool people this way, hiring artists and cover designers and map makers, and I commissioned a song from Nikhil,
Which is
uh,
awesome.
which I think is one of the coolest song ever.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, but
Yes.
so.
And Alan doing
Um,
the audiobook and
yeah, I have
yeah.
Alan doing the audiobook. I mean, that wouldn't have happened if a traditional publisher had somehow miraculously decided, yeah, well, let's do one epic fantasy or something, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, I think Alan is, I'm listening to audiobooks now,
Yeah.
and I think Alan is up there.
Yeah.
I would compare him to Stephen Pacey. I absolutely would.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's that good.
Yeah, his inflection is great.
And I never would have had that, you know. I'm just waiting for somebody to just discover him and snatch him away from me.
Oh,
Oh
he
no,
would.
he's gonna finish the Adan trilogy and
Yeah.
While Darkness Gathers.
Okay, yeah.
But I got to work with all these cool people, and AP Canavan, my
Hmm.
developmental editor, and I consider a great dear friend. You know,
Yep.
that never would have happened if I hadn't done the self-publishing thing. You know,
Yeah.
so you know, and
Yeah.
you just never know what your failure is going to lead to.
Hmm.
But it does require one thing, which is you got to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and say, "All right, now what?" You know.
Yeah. Speaking to what wanting to be traditionally published and failing, not only the impact that it had on you and the people you met, but the impact, speaking personally, that it's had on other people. Like
Hmm.
your journey has had such a great impact on me. Your ability to share all the wisdom that you have through the self, like that one self-publishing video I have bookmarked and downloaded, and I'll go back to it and I'll watch parts of it as I've been going on this journey seriously. And then I know that there are other people than me who are at different stages in their process who are benefiting from your so-called failure. uh, the creative freedom part, I think, is the biggest part for me.
Hmm.
Having read through The Prophet of Adan currently, and just I don't know, the way that story is told uh, is important in a way that I think if it were had to have been traditionally published, there are some things in there that wouldn't be. And it wouldn't be the story that it is, and it wouldn't have the positive effect that it's had on so many readers. And like we were talking about earlier, like, yeah, no story is going to be perfect for everybody. I think that's like just a sort of expectation that you have to have coming
Right.
into writing and releasing a book. But your creative freedom and that ability to craft, and have that integrity of your story intact is so important.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and there is this, and I'm not talking, I want to make sure I'm not talking badly about traditional publishing here, because I don't think I am. There is a lot of self-publishing is often I don't think so much anymore. This is old
There are a lot of
considerations
people
for
out
us.
there who still haven't figured out that there's
Yeah.
a lot of great books being self-published, you know.
Yeah, I think that I haven't. Okay, this is me talking about like the mass market and the demand that's inside of the mass market and traditional
Yeah.
publishing with romantasy. You have Laura Blake, who we spoke with, who just
Yeah.
published The Forgotten Dawn.
Yeah.
That's one I intend to read. I think that sort of story coming into the independently published space is going to bring people over more. Like the you're talking about the mass scale. That's something that is a very could have a very positive effect on the self publishing space.
Hmm.
And again, I think, and I said this in another conversation, both independent and traditional published authors work hard.
Yep.
Uh, Traditionally published authors still have to wear the marketing hat. At the end of the day.
Unless there's Stephen King or
Yeah, exactly. Unless it markets itself. Yeah.
but there no, the 99% of them have to
Exactly.
hustle the same way we do. Yeah.
exactly. Ours looks a little different, but I think the self-published author is traditionally a bit has the ability to be a tad bit more resourceful in certain circumstances. But at the end of the day, that's not a blanket statement. You could have
Right.
traditionally published authors who are the same way. Um, yeah, I think yeah, I am so happy that your creative integrity was kept intact. And I was just
Yeah.
actually just having this conversation with somebody today, a client of mine. I think uh, the if I were to have a conversation inside of trying to reach a wider audience, I would want the leverage of being able to say no.
Mm.
And I think just like knowing that I think most writer people who write and want to tell a story and want to share it with the world, it's important to know that you can say no and keep things intact as much as you want, no matter what route you go down. Um, I am that's one thing that with my story, that creative integrity and wanting if a publisher came to me and was like, hey, you need to add this into your story because it appeases the mass market, we already all know that no publisher has the pulse of the market entirely. So
No.
why are we doing this thing that's going to be in the market in a year and based on the information that you think is going to happen?
Right.
It's
Right.
silly to me.
Yeah.
How about we just tell the story authentically and tell the truth and see what happens? I don't know. To me, that just seems like the appropriate response.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Well, let's talk now that we've talked about passion and creativity and everything else. Let's talk a little bit about Tears of the Fallen, the first book in your series Mercy. And just no spoilers here because this is DDF, but we can talk in a non-spoiler way. And there's stuff on the back that obviously there's betrayal in here. There's vengeance. There's a there's a lot of trauma in here, right? This is a gritty story. This is not for the faint of heart. This story, and you don't pull your punches right from the get-go here at all.
Yeah.
And so that's something obviously you wanted to do that. That was a deliberate decision on your part. Coming out of the gates, boom, here you go. Right.
Yeah. That the scene we're speaking of with without I mean, yeah, like you said, it's on the back of the book also.
Yeah.
um but without getting into specifics, that was the backstory of my first D&D character.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had that in there, and a part of his, he took the oath of vengeance, and he was going to go out and find the people who did it. um as far as not pulling my punches, initial drafts, I actually faded to black um,
Uh-huh.
at a certain point in the scene. Uh, and if I had done that, and if I stayed with that choice, I, I, I needed to see what happened in order.
Mm,
I needed to discover exactly what happened. There was a call to it in a strange way, and you having finished the book, now we sort of kind of have an idea as to why things happened the way that they happened.
hmm
Um, there
Some of
I
it, by
if
the way, you don't learn until like a later flashback as well.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
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 If I had pulled punches, I wouldn't have discovered a lot of the deep political machinations of the enemy. I wouldn't have discovered um how certain things, I knew where things were going. I had that idea in my head.
hmm
Um I wouldn't have known how to get there if those things didn't happen the way that they happened. So I learned to not pull punches. I also didn't want to be gratuitous, which I mean, the particular scene we're speaking of, that was a kind of a hard balance. And with some feedback from people,
Sure.
I was grateful that they thought it wasn't
Uh-huh.
from the get, without even knowing why things happened the way that they did in that scene.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I deliberately didn't pull punches because if I had, I wouldn't have been able to explore and discover the way that I did.
Yeah.
And then I wanted the reader to kind of get that experience as well.
Well, and also talk about how responding to your experience defines you, not the experience itself, but how you respond to the experience, how it defines you. I think we also see in here that there's a difference between a person who who decides to go down that path of vengeance, and another who maybe is able to, at a certain point, let go and take a different route, and that has an effect. Or there's a moment in here which I don't want to get too, I'm not going to get details or names or anything, but there's a loss of a certain mentor figure that happens in here, and that has a huge effect on a character. And that for me was actually one of my favorite parts of the whole book,
Hmm.
because of how the character responded to that loss. That's a shift there. There's a change in that character as a result of not having that person in their lives any longer, but also realizing, without having ever understood it before, this is what this person was doing with me all this time. This is why this person was in my life trying to do this with me. And now I like kind of want to try to live up to that, I want to, you know what I mean? You know which
Yes,
character.
I know exactly. Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah.
Actually my favorite part in the whole book was that response to that loss. And I see that character suddenly, and life is like that. An event happens and it changes the course of your life, and you could respond to that event by being like, "Oh, just life sucks. I give up," and just drown in your sorrows. Or you
Hmm.
could respond to it the way the character does, which I feel like introduces a note of, yes, it's a gritty, dark world with a lot of trauma, but that response tells me that, oh, there's some hope here. There's some light in here.
Oh yeah. Um, Definitely. I think it's so tough. I think putting the characters to the ultimate test was something that I was intentional on.
Hmm.
Um, and at times, I'm sure it's going to come off grimdarky.
Uh-huh.
Although that was by no means my intention. My intention, I mean, there are even lines deliberately put at the towards the end of the book where hope is implied,
Uh-huh.
and because I think it's important. I think that perseverance is a and like you're exactly the way that you're referring to it. Um, is a big part of the I think the general character journey. And like you said, some characters make some choices and some make it go the other way. Uh, and it looks different for everybody. It's not as simple as, I'm gonna, without getting specific, I'm going to drown myself in a bottle, or I'm going to, go be a hero.
Right.
There are other ways that it shows up in our lives. And then it's also, maybe we're not, we know what we know some things that we don't know, but then there are things that we don't know that we don't know. And then it's sort of peeling back those layers. Yeah. And my own experience with grief, having lost my father, it'll be 12 years ago this summer, actually, when the book releases July 20th. That'll be the 12-year mark of his passing.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
yeah,
That's a wonderful way to honor your father, by the way.
yeah, and I think it was important for me to bring something to life on that day,
Hmm.
in my experience with grief, before I even thought about writing a book, it was always, I can go so many routes right now. Um, and in grief in many ways, like being you could be incredibly lonely. You can go down a certain path, or you can make a choice to, in my instance, crutch upstairs and sit in the chair and start writing. Um,
Yep.
and I'm glad actually that that's how you received that particular character's reception of grief. Um, yes, it's there's so many things. I'm actually so happy you pointed that out. Um, and then again, thank you for being such a attentive reader.
Yeah, no, I love that. That was really okay. That actually was my favorite moment in the story, and
Wow,
just thought, okay, I'm all in here now. This is this
wow,
is this is important. Yeah.
wow, that's cool to hear. Jeez. Um, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I'm sort of speechless there. Thank you for that. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think it's beautiful that this is something you're doing with. I mean, your father is somebody who, in so many ways, is you know, you have mentor figures in here, whether they're biological fathers or not. You
Yeah,
can tell that is an important relationship in your storytelling. Yeah,
yeah,
that a mentor figure, a guiding figure, who may not be perfect,
yep.
but there's something beautiful about that relationship that forms both the mentor and the mentee. It is important. It can also ennoble you to become a mentor, to become a father. A lot of times, I personally feel like I became a much better human being when I became a father.
Wow.
And just from the literal fact that
Yeah.
my older daughter was born, I hadn't cried since I was a little boy. I hadn't cried. I just, I don't, it wasn't a conscious, I'm never going to cry
Yeah.
kind of thing, but I just, maybe in over the years of, being socialized to what it means to be a man in our
Hmm.
culture, I had just sort of imbibed this idea that, boys don't cry or
Yeah.
whatever. When my older daughter was born, the tears were flowing, let me tell you, and
Yeah.
now I can't turn them off, and I cry at
Wow.
commercials even, it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. But no, and I think that made me a more empathetic person. But to be in a relationship, or even as a professor to my students, that's an incredibly important relationship to me.
Yeah.
That I take as a sacred thing, that I want to, as best I can, guide my students toward being better critical thinkers, toward passion for this realm of knowledge that I happen to have fallen in, which is literature. I
Yeah.
love it when my students say, hey, I actually like Beowulf now. So
Yeah.
but that is an important relationship. So I think we often focus on how that relationship affects the younger person, the mentee, but it also transforms the mentor as well, in significant ways. And I like how you're showing, you're giving us a portrayal of this relationship in here, which I think is has the potential to be really important and fascinating.
Yeah. I don't, yeah, I don't want to give up. I don't want to give away too much. But of course, yeah, I think my general experience in my life, I lost my father 2 days after I turned 19 years old.
That's young.
Um, and
Yeah.
I got, he had been sick a lot of my life. He had a stroke when I was 8. He
Wow.
was, I think, maybe a quarter of the year in my younger years, every year he'd be in the hospital. Um, and towards the end of his life, I did get that whole, he brought me over to his bed. He was, he had heart disease, and there were times where he'd be put into an operation and then brought out. He'd be, drugged up the way that you probably should be after a heavy operation.
Right.
And he talked to me and he said, you're the man now. You got to do it.
Wow.
And then I think there was this sort of story, that I made about my father, of him. He lived through such adversity, fighting his body literally, probably every day,
Yeah.
to make sure I got to a point where I was okay enough to be able to take on that role. And he stayed alive through pain, through difficulty. Um, and he did it all for what seemed like other people. Um,
Mm.
and of course, I'm sure part of it was himself, because he was a very empathetic person. He was a very loving person, a
Mm.
very caring person. Um, and I didn't. Unfortunately, at a young age, you don't really have an appreciation for that stuff, and then that's something that I had to work through. Maybe still do. Um, and it did story a lot of tying it into the book, uh, of the relationships that I wanted to create outside of, being exactly a father, because at that age and growing up the last 12 years without him, there's always that constant search of, mentor father figures.
Sure.
Even though I had him around for formative years, and even though he was a great father, as good a father as somebody in his case can be, um, there still always is that, wanting of a father figure. One of the reasons why I attached myself, I think, to John and Jacob from Talking Story, and their dynamic of
Sure.
seeing that father son. I was immediately like hooked into that community, because it's like, all right, here's a father son doing something together, having fun, talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that to me was so endearing. And I don't know. I think we can all find mentors, um, outside of direct parentage. Of course, that happens regardless as to whether parents are around or not.
Yeah.
But in my case, it definitely was something that I had often searched for, especially the last 12 years. Yeah,
Yeah, and it comes through in your storytelling. Yeah.
that's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. And there are other relationships in here too. There's a bit of a romance in there. So yeah.
Yeah,
Which
mixed bag of feedback for that one. Tom loves it. Tom Orange loves it. He
well,
just
I think Tom is great. So I'm
yeah.
gonna side with Tom on that.
Okay, okay. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Yeah, he thinks I should write romantasy now. He thinks that that's that's the next step.
Well, Tom is the one who read Fourth Wing and
Yeah.
kind of had fun with it, I think,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah. I too listened to the first book.
Okay.
I was like, yeah, what is what's going on here? It was yeah, it was a fine story. I thought that the first book had a lot going for it.
Yeah.
Um, the second book, I didn't exactly I love. I thought that it was sort of there's a lot of things that were going on all over the place. It kind of
Okay.
not to
Okay.
talk poorly about another story, but there are people who everyone loves it. It's just it wasn't. I don't think at that point after the second book, I was like, I don't know if this is this is my speed. Yeah,
Well, you gave it a try.
I did.
Good for you.
I
Yeah.
sure did. Yeah.
I haven't even done that much myself. So,
Yeah, that's all right. You're not. I don't think you're missing much.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. If I'm just being honest, I know that I'm going to get a lot of hate for that.
Uh,
I think the first book was a fine story. I think I really do. And I
uh,
think that the world building and the lore of that world are kind of cool. It in my and again, this is coming from not a New York Times best-selling author, Rebecca Yarros. I think that the schoolhouse thing. We just oh by the way, you read finished Will of the Many as well.
yeah. I mean, it's a familiar trope at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Orphan
yeah.
goes to magic school. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Will of the Many, at least where I'm at, hasn't overdone it. Um,
It's handled very well
yeah,
in the story. Yeah.
a Fourth Wing, I think, and by the second book, I was like, all right, like I don't this. I was like, I'm out. It just was a bit. It was just over my threshold. I think of what for me what I enjoy typically.
Okay.
Not that that is the right way to absorb a story. It was just the way that I absorb the story.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm looking forward to that discussion. We're gonna have. It's been delayed a little bit, but
Yeah.
it'll happen.
Oh yeah.
Jake is going to be hosting.
Oh yeah. That's gonna be a fun one
Yeah, yeah.
because he
No,
hates
I'm
Will
glad
of the
I read
Many.
that. It was a good book. You know, it wouldn't be like book of the year kind of thing for me, but
Yeah.
it was a good book, and I'm glad I read it. And I will read the next one, The Strength of the Few, I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
when it comes out in November, later
Yeah,
this
no,
year.
that's it. Late November, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
that was I think he's a story of another an author who self-published initially, and
Uh-huh.
then I think his the Shadow of What Was Lost, or no, maybe I'm
Isn't he
thinking
the
of
author of the Licanius?
the Lacanius trilogy. Yeah, that was it. I think
Okay.
that was initially self-published, and then
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
yeah, and then it was picked up traditionally, and then I think yeah he came on for the hierarchy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Cool. Well, Chance, this has been a delightful discussion, and I'm really glad we got a chance to talk with each other like this.
yeah,
It's not our first time being in the same video, but the first time I've been able to have you on my channel. So
yes,
this is really cool, and I'm really happy for you. And I think lots of folks are going to vibe with Mercy, Tears of the Fallen. So congratulations on getting your debut. I wish you all the fulfillment as you write or as you edit your second book, and I know you've already started your third as
yeah.
well. How many do you know how many books will be in the series in
Yeah, so
Mercy?
the main epic will be 4 books. The goal was how Lord of the Rings is a single book. I was like, I'm going to make a duology, but I'm going to tell it in 4 books.
Okay.
That was my goal. So the first and second book are a single arc, and then the third and fourth will, the goal is eventually I want to put them together in an edition. Whether or not it gets out to the public or not, I don't know. Who knows? But at that point, with having those 2 omnibus editions, I think would be cool. Also, what's it called? The Book of the New Sun storied that decision a little bit as well because you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
Shadow and
I
Claw, and
mean,
then
that's how I had Book of New Sun. Yeah.
yeah. So I kind of storied my desire to do a duology like that. Yeah,
Okay, so you're pulling a Gene Wolfe. All right.
yeah, yeah. Not quite as masterfully, yet. Hopefully one
Well,
day. Yeah,
there's only one Gene Wolfe, anyways.
yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'm really happy for you, and everybody go. There will be, of course, a link to Chance's channel, but I'll also put in a link to Mercy Tears of the Fallen. Where's the best place for people to pick up a copy?
Right now, Amazon. The ebook is pre-order. I think June 20th. I'm going to be the goal. I'm trying to. All the pieces are starting to fall together today. My sister's helped me put together on my website, chancedillonauthor.com. We're going to do a pre-sale of the hardcover with a cool naked hardback.
Ooh. Ooh,
Yeah,
ooh, ooh.
image done by Robert
Okay,
Chotia.
I'll put a link to your
Yeah.
website too then. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That one. I just can't wait to have my own hands on it. Like, yeah. Period. That's so excited for that.
Nice, nice. Okay, so yeah, I'll put a link to Amazon, to your website,
Thank you.
and whatever else I said. Oh, your YouTube channel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All that stuff will be in the description, folks. So go and check out Chance's channel. But that is it for us for now. Until next time.